What's that? Is that a wolf? I think so. Man. A majestic sound to others, an encroaching and threatening sound yet to even other people. Good evening. My name is Michael McConnell, and welcome to the Gray Wolf Symposium and the delisting from the Endangered Species Act. Given the choice to live or die, what would your choice be? The majority of us would select the former. Unfortunately, the gray wolf in the time and the place that we live today has not been afforded the same opportunity. A recent study revealed at County Yellowstone National Park of 95 wolves traveling in 11 packs. This time last year, the number was nearly double. And in 3 years alone, approximately 1,500 wolves have been killed from wildlife services, cattlemen, and big hunters alike. The primary reason for the decline in the wolf density is basically due to the ebb and flow of the ecosystem, where hunters can now legally shoot and kill a wolf found outside the confines of Yellowstone National Park. Wolves customarily leave the park to acquire food for their young on the brink of winter months and customary deep snowfalls found in Yellowstone National Park. And it is these ventures, sadly, that cause many wolf casualties. Despite the fact that the United States Wildlife Service has earmarked many of these wolves with radio collars. Under provisions currently being presented and indirectly supported by the United States Wildlife Fish and Game Service, wolves have been indiscriminately targeted for delisting from the Endangered Species Act. This in mind, we'd like to think that at a bare minimum, the wolves inside the park are protected. Nothing would be further from the truth. Cattlemen, politicians, and big game hunters all are lined up at this present time to acquire licenses to legally shoot and kill a wolf on site once outside the confines of Yellowstone National Park. What would you think that a license such as this would cost? Hundreds? Tens of hundreds? Neither is correct. A mere $13.59 for in-state residents and $35 for out-of-state residents. The gray wolf has been stereotyped as the villain of all ails, when in fact, quite the opposite is true. Wolves, although the apex predator within the environment, are essential to the ecosystem, and since the reintroduction in 1995 have been responsible for the elimination of overpopulated elk and mule deer. These actions have resulted in the rejuvenation of verdant ground that is now currently rapidly recovering, and in return the cause of smaller animals returning, which are primarily relying on that same ground for foliage and food and cover. You could even argue that the gray wolf has affected everything throughout the system, from fish to invertebrate to reptiles and yes, even other mammals. The very words of the chief biologist, Doug Smith, Yellowstone National Park administrator. There are numerous positions relative to the long-term survivability of the gray wolf. However, mankind, in all of his own wisdom, has shown throughout history he's been driven by indifferences, whereby he's primarily concerned about his own welfare prior to those of the others. It is for this very reason that we should, as individuals, remember phrases such as Proverbs 12:10, "A righteous man cares for the needs of his animal, but the kindest acts of the wicked are cruel." Man is assigned by the Lord Jesus Christ are caretakers of the earth and should act accordingly. Is anybody within the audience familiar with the attributes driving the delisting of the wolf from the Endangered Species Act? Well, here they are. Number 1, cattlemen and their interests. Number 2, big game hunters and their interests. Number 3, politicians and, yes again, their interests. Ranchers. In 1995, 66 wolves were reintroduced into Yellowstone National Park, whereby recent studies now reveal 1,651 wolves in 111 breeding pairs, in the same exact territorial area. The United States Fish and Wildlife Services has now implemented a state-mandated plan whereby 30 breeding pairs and over 300 wolves are marked for extermination. And taking into consideration that the reasoning for this, that some of it is predation on cattle, here are some statistics that do not back those claims. In those same years, 84 cattle and 64 sheep were reported as predation from gray wolves. In that very same time period, over 2.5 million head of cattle were standing. And even sadly, in the same time, over 260 wolves were killed, resulting in a direct relationship to that predation. Big game hunters smoke a pack a day. And no, we're not talking about cigarette smokers. This is a slogan openly and publicly supported by hunting clubs in Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming. The same clubs that are sponsoring the rejuvenation of elk herds and big mule deer. Political seats. Would you turn the welfare of a gray wolf over to a rancher or a cattleman? Such is the case in Ken Salazar, a fifth-generation cattle rancher who was appointed in the Bush administration and took it upon himself to father the delisting of the gray wolf from the Endangered Species Act. These circumstances occurred less than 14 years after the gray wolf was reintroduced into Idaho and Wyoming. These actions were taken despite the fact that the proposed plan by Ken Salazar was not supported by scientific or historical data. So considering the gray wolf has historically and to this day had to manage dire circumstances due to human involvement, how can we as individuals improve their circumstances? Following are but a few of the suggestions whereby each of us harmonically can coexist. What attributes are required for individual states to implement and manage the gray wolf properly? First and foremost, we must institute a committee to incorporate scientific and historical and economic and political viewpoints. Number 1, presently state management plans and programs are not supported by scientific and historical data, and as a result will negatively affect the available gene pools of gray wolves within Yellowstone National Park and adjacent areas. Number 2, an appointed representative from each group should engage in a round-style type committee. Number 3, public education should be heightened. Education is always important. If we don't know about what we're talking about, we sure don't know how to fix it. Number 4, require a minimum number of wolves are derived from historical and scientific data to include weather, human intervention, and culling. Accomplishing these goals will require a soothing of anti-conservative groups and a needless slaughter of adult gray wolves and their young. The present course we are now traveling, we should question our own motives by asking a very important question. The whole world, what does a man have to gain in the whole world if he stands to lose his own soul? For a man in all his own wisdom shall always put the needs of himself before the needs of others. These actions are clearly indicative and evident in determining factors driving the delisting of the gray wolf from the Endangered Species Act. Factors propagated by individuals and personal agendas involving cattlemen, big game hunters, and even the likes of lobbyists and their prospective affiliations. I, as a steward of my own and surrounding environment, shall continue to maintain an agenda to protect all and endeared creatures of the earth. What shall you do? Protecting and preserving the wolf population is simple, really, wouldn't you think? Here are the required actions which every one of us needs to partake. Designate buffer zones around and adjacent to the Yellowstone National Park. Compensate ranchers for predation, wolf predation involving sheep and cattle. Prohibit trapping and hunting of all wolves in all states. Maintain a federal oversight committee. Lastly, and certainly not leastly, increase public education. Now the choice is yours. What shall you do? For see, my personal involvement is much more, for I live with 2 of them.